Shabbat shalom, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom, Jay.
Hamakom Yenachem.
Shabbat Shalom.
Baruch Tiyah. Hi, Aliza.
Hi. I'm going to retreat. I'm going to have to bug off a little bit. I just wanted to say good morning.
Okay, good to see you. Thank you for your prayers this week. For everybody for their good wishes, for your good wishes and tefillot. So we're going to start in a couple minutes. I will give you the source sheet from now. Oops, that's the wrong one.
It's
That
good
is
now.
not. You'll see that's a little preview of what's going to be on the sheet. Not what I intended to post there. Okay, there you go. There's the source sheet.
Yay for poetry.
Yay for poetry. We're gonna see a great Amichai poem that I'm sure some of you have encountered before. I've certainly taught it before, one of my favorites. Okay, we still have a minute to go. Good morning, Paul. Good to see you. Good morning, Bob. Good morning, Robin. You're on the train. Oh my God. Hi, Robin. Good morning, Richard. Shabbat Shalom, Lauren.
Diane, thinking of you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Where are you, Richard?
Oh, I've got a fake background on. That's the subway station where I get off to go to work, Franklin Street. And and people put respect signs up after Aretha Franklin died.
I was thinking that it was that like
Yeah,
evoking
yeah.
Aretha Franklin. Wow.
And then the MTA remade the signs and they've been left up there. Nobody has absolutely done anything to them. They've
Oh,
been
that's
respected.
amazing. Wow.
And the
Very
same thing has happened in Brooklyn at Franklin Avenue.
Wow. Love that.
Yeah, it's fabulous. It's really good.
I love, Robin, that you're on Amtrak. That's so cool.
I'm using data.
You're using data. Yeah. Got
Yeah,
it. Got it.
yeah, it's a beautiful Connecticut shoreline now, though, so that's nice.
Nice. Can you show it to
Yeah.
us for a second?
Don't
worry about it. It's okay.
Yeah, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, I saw green. I saw green. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Morning, Daniel.
Shabbat Shalom. Hamakom Yenachem.
You're on with a fake face.
Good Shabbos, Rabbi Diane.
Good Shabbos.
Oh,
Aaron.
fake face. You just have to.
I'm so sorry for your loss, Rabbi Diane.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Nice to have a good Shabbat Shalom, Paul. Good to see you. Shabbat Shalom, Suan.
Shabbat Shalom, carrying you in my heart and prayers.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, Marcia Meislin. Shabbat Shalom, Alana. David, Ronnie. Wow, so great to see everybody.
Shabbat Shalom and all our love and condolences, Rabbi Diane.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's remember this is Shabbos, which actually gives me a respite, a beautiful respite from Shiva. So I appreciate all your condolences, but for today, we're going to focus on Torah. And I feel so held, really lovingly held by this community. So
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, one second. Okay. So today's Nehemiah, good morning, Shabbat Shalom, Asher Chaim, Alan. Wow, it's great to see so many regular Torah students here.
Boker Tov, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. So today's Parsha is Nitzavim, and it happens to be one of my favorite Parshas. For some people, for some rabbis and some students of Torah, every Parsha is the favorite Parsha. This is not true for me. This is really one of my favorite Parshiot. It's to me, it's just stunning, and I hope I will be able to convey why. And we're going to start with the Torah Blessing, and then do a little introduction, dive into the Parsha, and then zoom out for some bigger ideas. Okay, Jay, would you like to do the blessing over Torah study?
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו לעסוק בדברי תורה.
So blessed are is God for giving us this sacred space and this community with whom to study Torah. Amen, amen, amen. Okay, so here again is the source sheet. And I'm going to screen share and we're going to talk about Nitzavim. Let's see, share my screen. Let me just see if I can make this full screen. Okay, so I'm teaching this in my memory of my mother. May her memory be blessed. And today's session is called Just Standing Here. And we're going to think about what does it mean to be standing here on this day. But to begin with, I want to teach a little piece of Gemara, of Talmud from Moed Katan, Tractate Moed Katan, about how a person is like a Torah scroll. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer. So Shimon ben Elazar teaches and grounds his teaching in a Braita, in an earlier source, an earlier, more authoritative source. It's called Tanaitic, but I'm not going to go into that now. Ha'omed al hamet b'shat yitziat neshama chayav l'kroa. So a person who is present or standing before, literally standing before, a person who dies at the moment that their soul leaves their body is obligated, chayav l'kroa, is obligated to rend their garments. To what is this compared? Lema zeh domeh. What is this like? L'sefer Torah, to a sefer Torah, shenisraf, that burned, for whatever reason burned, shechayav l'kroa. That you're also obligated to rend your clothes if you're in the presence of a Torah that has burned in a fire. Okay, so that's at least one way that a person is like a Torah scroll. For both, if you see their demise, or if you're present at the time of their demise, you are obligated to rend your clothes. And the Ramban, medieval Sephardic commentator, says something so beautiful about this. It seems to me that the soul and the body is like the names of God on the parchment. V'li nir'eh shehanefesh baguf ka'azkarot begulin. I think I said that right. Begulin? Begvilin? Someone in the chat, if you need to correct me, please do, or tell me which pronunciation is correct. So that the body is like the parchment and the names of God is like the soul, right? So that's, a more specific comparison of a Torah scroll to a person. And, the fact that a scroll is a scroll, right? And that it unfolds over time is also there are all kinds of ways we can compare a person to a Torah, but that's another way that a person's life unfolds. And it's not linear, right? It's cyclical and circular. And yet changes, right, changes over time. It's not completely cyclical and circular. Okay, so that was my opening, and I'm going to come back to that idea about a person being like a Torah scroll. But now, so hold that if you can, hold that in the back burner, and now we're going to put the Parsha on the front burner. And I start with last week's Parsha, but let's just give this a little context, and I've said this in other weeks, and I'm sure other teachers have as well, that what we're doing in Devarim, what we're doing in the book of Deuteronomy, is we have moved into the human voice from the voice of the omniscient narrator. So the book of Devarim has a whole different quality than the other 4 books of the Torah. And it's Moses' last speeches, specifically this one, which is considered the last oration, to the people of Israel before they enter the Promised Land. And it's also his last speeches before he dies. And this is considered his very last, right? So mortality is sort of inscribed or encoded into these speeches. And we'll see more about that in a minute. So I start with last week's Parsha at the end of Kitavo to give us a little background to Nitzavim. So here we go. Vayikra Moshe el Kol Yisrael, Vayomer Alehem, and Moses called into all Israel and said to them, Atem re'item et kol asher Adonai le'einechem be'eretz Mitzrayim, leParo, lechol avadav ulechol artso. So Moses called into Israel and said unto them, you have seen all that the Lord did before your eyes in the land of Egypt unto Pharaoh, and to all Pharaoh's servants, and to all his land. So there's one thing wrong with this verse, and it's pretty stunning, which is they have not seen the generation who died out, right? The parents of the people standing before Moses are the generation that came out of Egypt. This is not the generation that came out of Egypt. They haven't seen anything, right? They're not the ones who came out of Egypt. They're not the ones who went through the split sea. They're not the ones who were standing at Sinai, right? That generation had to die out, so a new generation could be ready to go into the promised land, something we've talked about in other sessions. So what have they seen? Here it says in verse 2, Hamasot hagdolot asher ra'u einecha ha'otot v'hamoftim hagdolim hahem. The great trials or tests that your eyes, again, this insistence, your eyes have seen, asher ra'u einecha, the signs, and the signs, another way to say signs, I'm just looking at the English, signs, wonders, the great wonders, and the great wonders, okay? So this insistence on immediacy, right, that they saw, even though the generation before Moshe at that moment was not the generation that saw. V'lo natan Adonai lechem lev ladat ve'inayim lir'ot ve'eznayim lishmo ad hayom hazeh, and God did not give you a heart to know, and eyes to see, and ears to hear until this very day. So again, this runs all through Dvarim, like you have seen in this very day, and knowing, like knowing in a whole kind of like knowing with your whole body, right? Knowing in an entirely organic way, which we'll see more of in a minute, or in a few minutes. V'olechetchem 40 shana b'midbar, v'lo valu salmotechem me'alechem v'na'alcha lo valta me'al raglecha. What a beautiful verse this is. And I've led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes are not waxen old, have not like worn out. Your clothes have not worn out, and your shoe has also not worn out on your foot, right? So there's something that has been ever renewable in your wilderness experience, ever renewable, right? Lechem lo achaltem v'yayin v'sechar lo shatitem lamatan. So you have not eaten bread, you've eaten manna, right? Neither have you drunk wine. Sorry, I tried to change all the ye's to use, but I missed a couple, so sorry about that. Neither have you drunk wine or strong drink. Okay, so you have not done these things. Why? L'ma'an teid'u, so that you will know. Nothing has gotten in the way of your knowing. Ki ani Adonai Elohechem, that I am God your God. Now you can say, and I can make a long argument for this, but I'm not going to make a long argument for this today, that the entire Torah, it is the purpose of the entire Torah is that you know God, right? And this is said explicitly. I don't know if it's chapter 8 or 9 in Exodus, that I did all this, right? I brought all these plagues. I did this whole kind of Exodus drama so that you shall know God and the Egyptians shall know God. So this is the purpose that's encoded throughout the Torah, that ultimately you shall know God, we shall know God. Ushmartem et divrei habrit hazot va'asitem otam lema'an tazkilu et kol asher tasun. So observe, therefore, or guard the words of this covenant and do them, that you may make all that you do to prosper. But that's an interesting word, this translation of prosper. The word is taskilu, laman taskilu. It's another word for understanding or being intelligent. Sechel, brains, right? Or mind. So guard the covenant and, observe or embody or practice what's in the covenant. Why? So that, again, you shall understand. Okay, so now I'm going to invite you to do something that I don't usually invite people to do. So this is the start of Nitzavim, and I actually have it makes my heart beat a little bit because to me it's so powerful. And the way it starts is you are standing this day, all of you. So I want to invite all of you, or any of you who are able and willing and feel like it, to actually stand for these verses and see what difference that makes. Let's see, I'm just going to raise my desk here. And if you don't feel like it, it's totally fine. No pressure. It's just like, what difference does it make when you shift position and hear the Torah? What difference does it make? So here's the beginning of our parsha. Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem. You are standing this day, all of you. All of you. Lifnei Adonai, before God. Elohechem, your God. Now who's standing here? Rashechem, Shivtechem, Zeknechem, Veshotrechem, Kol Ish Yisrael. Your heads, your tribes, your elders, and your officers, even all the men or all the people, Anashim can also be including of the feminine, all the people of Israel. Or I would say Anashim could be inclusive of all genders or the lack thereof. 10, verse 10. Tapchem, children, Meshechem, your wives, Gercha, your stranger, Asher bekerev machanecha, who are in the heart of your camp, Mechotev etzecha ad shoev meimecha, from the cut from the woodcutter to the drawer of water. The one who draws water. La'avracha bevrit. Okay, so actually, let me just say something about it. So absolutely everybody. It doesn't matter what your status is. You can be, the president. You can be a woodcutter. You can be a refugee. Whoever you are, you stand here today. Okay. Why? So why do you stand here today? La'avracha bevrit Adonai Elohecha. That you should enter, right? Pass over into. So there's that word avracha, which also means ivri, which is also, this root is also the root of ivri, which means Hebrew. La'avracha bevrit Adonai Elohecha uva'alato. So to pass over into the covenant of God, your God, and into God's oath, Asher Adonai Elohecha karet imcha hayom. That God, your God, is karet, is, let's see how they're translating here, makes with you this day, or is cutting with you today. There's an action of cutting, which is at the heart of karet brit. Laman hakim otcha hayom lo la'am. That God may establish you this day unto God for a people. Interesting locution. V'hu yiyeh lecha le'elohim, and God will be for you a God. Kasher diber lecha, as God told you. V'kasher nishba la'avotecha, and as God swore to your ancestors, la'Avraham, l'Yitzchak, u'Yaakov, to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Okay, so here's a really interesting verse, 13. V'lo idchem levatchem anochi koret et habrit hazot ve'et ha'alah hazot. And it's not with you only that I am establishing this covenant with you and this oath. Ki et asher yeshno po imanu. also with those who are not here today. Omed Hayom, who are not standing here today, Lifnei Adonai, before God, Eloheinu, our God, or your God. The et asher einenu. I'm sorry, I confused this. I am cutting this oath, or I am establishing this covenant with you, those who are standing here today. The et asher einenu po imanu hayom, and with those who are not with us today. Meaning, the way this is traditionally understood, meaning with all the descendants that come in the generations after you who are standing here this day, I am also establishing my covenant. Okay, and with all the generations coming after you, and also, all the people that join your people, all the converts, you're all, in a sense, standing here this day. Okay, so with that, everybody can sit. I'm going to stop my share. I'm going to lower my desk. And I'm going to ask you a few things. Any questions, comments, but specifically I want to know, what difference did it make your standing, if any, while you heard these verses of Torah? Okay, standing was cool. I love that from Margot, like that. All right, so I'll take any hands, okay, great. Neshama, I'm gonna call second. Let me just, and Neshama, Sharon, Tali, and I'm gonna ask people as usual to keep their comments brief so we can hear as many voices as possible in the room. Okay, Neshama.
Okay, so I'm standing here barefoot, and that makes all the difference. I could feel my feet on the ground, and I realized that whenever we stand in synagogue river with our shoes on, it's not the same thing. I may never stand anymore in the city unless I'm barefoot. So that's what I wanted to say. It was extraordinary. Right there. Thank you.
Beautiful, Neshama. Thank you so much. I just want to bring to our mind what Asher Chaim said. It felt different than standing in community, shoulder to shoulder. Something was missing. Yes, and that too is part of this moment. Okay, Tali Ann, you can unmute yourself. I don't see you right this second. Tali, there you are.
Thank you, because I felt such a rootedness when I was standing, and there was also a sense of a sense of strength within my being from head to toe by standing. But it's really the sense of rootedness, that there is my connection. Here I am, but I have what I carry with me, this history, this memory, this connection to the past, into the present, into the future.
Beautiful, Tali. And I think what you're saying now will actually come up in other verses in the Torah, which hopefully I'll remember to make the connection. But you're all reminding me that there's something about reading in an embodied way. Like we forget, right, to read with our whole bodies or to hear Torah with our whole bodies, and standing kind of, brings our bodies back into the equation. Okay, Sharon, Ronnie, Paul.
Shabbat Shalom. I think this is connected to having heard it standing, and it relates to what Asher Chaim said, which I felt, yes, that the absence of kulchem, as in the whole community standing shoulder to shoulder, but it allowed me to hear kulchem in a different way, which is all of you, your whole being, individual, you personally, your whole being is standing before God, right? Because you can hear that in kulchem also. And
yeah, beautiful.
It felt like there is no part of you that is not standing before God.
Right, and that of course links us back to the Shema, which is also from Deuteronomy, right? Not in that order, but yeah, it's like all of us, the whole community, with all its diversity, in all its sort of, variety of status, and all of each of us is being called upon at this moment to stand here. Thank you. Okay, Ronnie and Paul.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. Unlike Asher Chaim, I felt as if I were standing with every Israelite from the beginning of time to the present, and being alone and together was just an amazing sensation. And it reminded me of the first time I ever tried to do the Great Aleinu, and I actually got down with my face to the floor. There's something so powerful about embodying ritual for those of us who are more cerebral. And I thank you for the experience. It was virtually mystical for me.
Wow. That's amazing. And it's interesting because sometimes like I refrain from doing these kinds of things. Oh, it's too cheesy, it's too weird, it's too something. But I guess it's worth the risk, right? Here we are. Okay, Paul and Estelle, and then I'm going back to the text. So if other people have something to say, just hold on until we do a little bit more Torah.
I was struck by the effort that it takes to stand and to maintain your position without falling. And so it is with the covenant. It requires enormous effort.
Yes.
And if one does not maintain that effort, then gravity or conditionality will assert itself. The covenant is a barrier to entropy.
Beautiful. And Paul, it's amazing. You're actually anticipating the very end of the session, which we'll get to, God willing. But that was actually one of my questions, given what I've been through this week. Like, with all that life is, how do we even stand up? How do we even stand up? How do we stay standing? How do we hold it all? How do we? Right? It's an effort. It's a tremendous ask. It's such a huge ask.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
It's nearly impossible. And I think one of the reasons for the sheer quantity of effort that Moses puts into his peroration is a testament to the effort that's required.
Yeah. So what we're required to do every day is basically impossible. I would say, I don't know if everyone experiences.
Or nearly so.
Or nearly so.
Right on the edge.
Yes, right on the edge. Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Powerful. Estelle.
Yes. Good Shabbos, everybody.
Shabbos.
And I just want to put in one quick personal note. According to the Gregorian calendar, this weekend is when my father died 31 years ago. And it was the 11th of Elul, which was August 19th. But I know what happened that whole lead up to his death. So my standing is that his bratty kid, who was a rebel, is actually willing to stand. And last Shabbat was the first time I automatically just stood up. I was in my kitchen and I had my cereal and I just stood up. I try to eat before the session. So it's hard for me to stand up because my father was very antagonistic and at the same time wanted me to make sure I knew that I was Jewish and not to assimilate. But he also didn't want to hear from me. So he didn't want to hear his smart little girl and I should not be seen. So I used to get very embarrassed in school. I would turn beet red when I had to stand up and talk. And so it was even hard for me to decide to say this to all of you. But somehow in time, I'm beginning to trust a little bit more, to be with people and to not expect that I will be harmed, that I will be put down. But that's not easy. And I'm sorry for the death of your mother.
Thank you, Estelle.
You're very welcome. And thank you for calling on me also. So
Thank you for standing. Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
Okay. As I said, I just want to let us soak that in. Thank you so much, Estelle.
You're welcome.
And as I said a couple of minutes ago, I'm going to do some more Torah and then Laura will come back to you. Okay. Okay. So here we go. So I'm just going to do just actually this one little comment and then go to the next idea. So the Mei Shiloach here says, why is the water drawer and the woodcutter, why is everybody mentioned here to teach us what? That is that you are tied to blessed God. In other words, each of you, right? The individual you, your heads, your heads of the community at a high level, unto the one who draws your water, which is a low level, at least in terms of human society, right? But each of you, in terms of God's perspective, is tied to God directly, right? So we might have our distinctions on this plane, and not everyone has access to the goodies of society, but everyone has that direct connection, which is exactly where we're going right now, to the direct connection. So if you remember, just to give this more force, the Deuteronomy piece, and we're actually coming onto my favorite piece of my favorite parsha. So hold on. I just want to go back to Exodus a minute to give Deuteronomy 30 a little more force, to remember what happened at Sinai. So the people heard what we call the 10 Commandments, although they're divided up, they can be divided up differently and enumerated differently. So the people heard it, and what did they do? And let me just read this so they were standing at Sinai as we were just standing. And what did they feel? They felt terror. וכל העם רואים את הקולות ואת הלפידים ואת כל השופר ואת ההר עשן ויער העם וינועו ויעמדו מרחוק. And all the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the blare of the horn of the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they fell back and they stood at a distance. And I think, is this Vayanu actually trembled, which hasn't been translated? If anyone knows, put into the chat, okay? So they hear it, and they fell back, which is interesting because that kind of recalls what Paul said, right? They fell back, they couldn't stand. And they stood at a distance. They couldn't stand close. And what do they say? Vayomru el Moshe, daber ata imanu v'nishma'a. You talk to us and we can hear, we can listen. V'al yidaber imanu Elohim. And don't let God talk to us, pen namu, because we will die. This is too overwhelming. We can't hear this. Do you ever feel like that? Something too overwhelming, you can't hear it. Or there are moments you can't hear it. Or maybe you can never hear it. Vayomer Moshe el ha'am al tira'u ki leva'avur nasot etchem ba'Elohim. And Moshe said, don't be scared because God came to test you. That's a whole thing we can unpack, but we're not going to do it today because that's not the point of where we're going. Ba'avur tiyeh yir'ato al penechem levilti tachteu. In order the fear of God may be ever with you so that you do not go astray. So in other words, you should have this experience so that going forward you'll remember this awe and you won't transgress. But again, vayamod ha'am merachok, and the people stood at a distance. U'Moshe nigash el ha'arafel asher sham Elohim. And Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. So Moses is Moses because Moses can take proximity with the divine. Moses can take the power, the overwhelming power of intimacy with God. But the people can't take it. They can't take it, right? They were slaves in Egypt. Moses was a prince in Egypt, right? Moses was not traumatized the way the people were. So what they want is distance. And what's interesting, because God, in all God's generosity, actually gives them exactly that distance. from this moment on, God talks to Moses and Moses talks to the people, and God does not talk to the people head on because the people can't take it. That's the gift, right? That's an amazing gift. If you think about it as a parent, and I know I've come to this in ways that have been difficult, each parent has their agenda and their vision, and that can be very overwhelming to a child. And the child can want something entirely different because they're not who you think they are, or they're not who you wish they were, right? So you have to change your mode of communication. And Deuteronomy is the apex of that mode of communication. And here I think is really the summit in terms of that theme. Okay, so now we're back to Deuteronomy with that backdrop. Okay, so this is what Moshe tells the people. Ki hamitzvah hazot asher anochi mitzavcha hayom lo niflate hi. Sorry, I have to make it a little bigger for my eyes. Okay. Mimcha v'lo rechoka hu. He. Sorry, there's a vav and there's a chirik there. So this instruction, which I enjoin upon you today, or which I command you today, is not too baffling for you, not too wondrous for you, and it is not too far away for you, which is interesting because there's that idea of far away, far and, being far and being close. Lo b'shamayim hi is not in the heavens. It's not in the skies. That you should say, Le'mor mi ya'aleh lanu hashamayma. You should say, v'yikacheha. You should say, who's going to go get it for us, right? Who's going to be our leader and go get this Torah that we are seeking, right? That's not what you should say. So again, this is what you don't need to say. Who can go up to the heavens and get it for us and impart it to us or teach it to us, that we may observe it? V'lo me'ever layamhi, and it is not across the sea. That you should say, Mi ya'avor lanu et ever hayam. Who should pass? Who shall go across the seas? Vayikacheha lanu, and take it for us or get it for us. V'yishme'enu, and have us hear it. That's the literal translation of teach it to us, impart it to us. Avin na'asena, and that we shall do it. Why? So you will have like the wrong idea of Torah, that if you think it's far away from you, wrong idea, right? Here Dvarim comes to tell us what it actually is. Ki karov elecha hadavar ma'od beficha uvilvavcha la'asoto. Know the thing is very close to you in your mouth and in your heart to observe it. Okay, there's a lot more, but I'm going to stop after the next sentence, after the next verse. Re'eh natati lefanecha hayom et hachayim et hatov. See, I place before you today life and what is good, ve'et hamavet ve'et hara, and death and what is bad. I'm sorry, one more verse. I can't keep it hanging there. Asher anochi mitzavcha hayom lahava et Adonai. For I command you this day to love God, your God, Adonai Elohecha, l'lechet b'drachav, to walk in God's ways, u'lishmor mitzvotav, and to obey God's commandments, v'chukotav, and God's laws, u'mishpatav, and God's statutes, v'chiyita, and you shall live, v'ravita, and you shall multiply, u'be'rachacha Adonai, and God will bless you. God, your Lord, will bless you in the land, the Aretz Asher Ata Bash Shama, in the land that you came to inherit. Okay. So let me just read this, and then I'll take some comments, and then a little bit more study together. So this is from the Velveteen Rabbi, who says, This mitzvah, this connection, this instruction is not beyond us. It doesn't require us to be someone that we're not. It doesn't demand that we change altogether before we even attempt to take it in. This is a mitzvah which is already sweet in our mouths, already encoded in our beating hearts. Place 2 fingers on a pulse point and feel for your heartbeat. Lub dub, you returning toward God, God returning towards you. You reaching out, God reaching back. And this goes back to what my chavruta and dear friend Rabbi Sharon said, that all of us are being called forth on this day. There's no part of us that is not being called forth. And what this piece adds is that that's where Torah is. That's where Torah is. Okay, so now Lori was waiting patiently, and then Beth, and then Alana.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi Diane.
Shalom, Lori.
My hair's a mess because it's my wedding anniversary, and my husband and I are actually taking our bodies to Sojo. So we're in water.
Nice.
For Shabbat.
Beautiful.
And
Beautiful.
What I wanted to share, which is, my own private journey, but I'm bringing it public because I'm standing for the justice of the fact that many people, including my brother, have committed suicide and overdosed on drugs. And those of us that had schizophrenic mothers or mentally ill relatives, I chose to stand for love and justice. When growing up as a child, everyone was terrified of mental illness, and people are terrified of addiction. So for me, the standing for God and studying Kabbalah with Rabbi David and my Zohar studies have given me that faith and depth to stay in the earth again. And in the trauma model with Peter Levine, trauma's in the body. It's in the reptilian brain. So when we stand on Mother Earth and we feel the Shekhinah and we pray with Torah, there is a resource that's happened for me where I can speak about addiction now and mental illness. And I'm not afraid of the judgments I was afraid of most of my life, because it says, love the Lord my God with all my heart. And the other thing I would say is, when we stand in our reptilian brain, every emotion is energy in motion, but it is the return to the body and to the earth and to the Shekinah that I can pray with you. And then when you said distance, it's the boundaries. I need to set the boundaries so that I can return to the earth and to love. And when I find those boundaries, then I can love you. And so when you go to Recovery 12 Steps, they say detach with love, meaning when I set a boundary, it's because I go into mindfulness, not because I don't love you, but mindfulness will bring me back to my body.
Beautiful, Lori. So I just want to say that, and this goes back to what we were talking about before. So not only are you standing, which is a miracle in itself, but you are standing for love. That is amazing. Thank you so much for this gift, Lori. Breath. Okay. And I loved everything you said, but also what you said about distance and how distance enables us sometimes. Sometimes precisely what we need is distance so that we can connect. Right? Beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay. So let me do a lineup, and then I'm going to say, we're going to go back to some texts. Okay. So we're going to go Beth, Alana, Marcia, David, and again, I'm going to ask people, if possible, if you could be concise so we can hear as many voices and do as much Torah as possible. Go, Beth.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
It's so interesting that the people stepped back, that they couldn't handle the thunder and the lightning. And yet, we're also told that everything that God has given us is internal, that we're not far away from it at all. So it's just fascinating that people try to step away from something, but they can't. You can't back up far enough to get away from yourself. You just can't. You're always going to be right here no matter what you try to do. And I think that the backing up is finding the experience of the revelation to be so counterintuitive that it cannot be grasped, it can't be heard, it can't be felt, it can't be seen. And it takes little teensy, itsy bitsy approaches, one micron at a time, to come up against the things that we find so counterintuitive. And it could be anything. It could be, the revelation from God at Sinai. It could be something about ourselves that we don't know. It could be anything. And it just takes that little teeny incremental step each time. And it's so funny to think of, because you're not actually going anywhere. You're taking these steps, but you're already here, and yet you are making a traverse.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Beth. Yeah, and I think what you're trying to articulate is the paradox, right? All this is, all these texts spell, or these what seems like competing messages in the Torah spell as paradox, right? And it's only paradox that ultimately can hold the complexity of the truth. Okay, Alana.
Boker Tov. I'm just so moved by this moment in the text, and this moment together, and this moment in Moshe's life. It feels like such a profound blessing of belonging. Moshe, who's hours away from dying, from going off alone on the mountain, I'm just feeling the trajectory of his life, of starting off alone on the Nile. And now here we are with Moshe, and he is blessing us with this loving, generous, across time and space sense of belonging that is his belonging as well, that he's been able to internalize, and that he's giving to us. And it was so beautiful to stand up and to receive that. And I guess what I'm also filled with is just the blessing of being with you all, with you, Rabbi Diane, as always, and in this moment, with so many of you over this time of the pandemic, that we've been able to, in this moment and other moments, receive Torah together and be in Chabruta. This blessing that here we are, we're standing together and we're receiving.
Beautiful, Alana. Wow. And you're right. Moses goes from abandonment and being between two worlds to complete belonging, and inviting us to recognize that truth. And it starts with, your officers. I was studying with as always with my chavruta this morning, Rabbi Sharon, and we were saying, oh, look, it says your wives and your little ones and your stranger. Isn't that offensive? But it starts with your officers and your, the heads of your tribes, and then your woodcutter, and who's your. So it's everybody's your, right? I mean, too bad they didn't put the word husbands in as well, or your partners in, or whatever, but it's all your. Like, we all belong to one another. That is an inescapable fact that is called to our attention. And here we are, we belong to one another. Here we are. Thank you, Alana. That was beautiful. Okay, Marcia.
Hi, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Hi, Rabbi Diane. So I just want to acknowledge the magnitude of the journey for me personally, and maybe some others, from as a kid in yeshiva, Orthodox yeshiva. God is this lightning and thunder ready to pounce on me with every little thing I do, especially if I ate the wrong thing on Pesach, this big. Boom, strike me down with lightning. And, that was hard. And I became hypersensitive to criticism. But honestly, the God that I live with now is a still small voice within. And the contrast is huge. And when I need God, I've got to turn inward, not upward and outward and scary. but just this beautiful, gentle God that I love what Rabbi David taught us about Ashamnu, Bagadnu, that we're not hitting our hearts in guilt and shame, but we're rather knocking on the door of our hearts, inviting it to open.
Oh,
and
wow.
that's where God is for me. So
Beautiful.
thank you.
Beautiful, Marcia. Thank you so much. Sorry. Okay. I had a comment about that. Yeah, and it's interesting. Here's what's interesting to me, because I went to Yeshiva Flatbush, in the 60s and 70s, modern Orthodox Yeshiva in Brooklyn. And it's like, we were in the shadow of the Holocaust. Like my teacher in 73 went to fight in, Israel's, Yom Kippur War and came back like my favorite teacher, brilliant, inspiring, sweet, came back a traumatized mess. I had no idea what happened. And it's like, it's all here in the Torah, but what is our moment in history and the specific culture of our community bring out in the Torah? It's fascinating because it was all here, the gentleness, right? The still small voice, but you got the harshness. Okay, David, and then Kathy Lynn, we're going to do a little more Torah and I'll come back to you.
Am I there?
You
Shabbat
are here. You are so here.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
We're not born standing, and we don't end up standing. And what Asher Chaim said about missing being with everybody and standing brought me somehow to my childhood. Like, what was I missing standing here, not alone, all with you, and I realized when I was a child, I used to look around at the high holidays, which is the only time we went. And I noticed those who couldn't stand. And there's something about, it's just such a beautiful thing in Torah. And here we are at the end, and Moses, and about mortality. And, and when I go to synagogue now with my dad, who's had a couple of hip replacement surgeries, can't stand so easily anymore. So there's something so profound about the act of standing and being able to stand, and the gratitude that I feel with it. But that feeling of mortality, and that here we are at the end.
Yeah, I think mortality is all over these texts, and Moshe is facing his death, right, and desperate to really transmit this message to his people. Yeah, and how do we how do we stand in the face of mortality? That's the question that keeps coming up here, right? How do we stand in the face of death? So let's go back, because I think we're going to actually face that question head on. So let me go back to some sources here. Okay, so here's what I want to ask people. So we're going to come back to the idea of how is a person like a Torah scroll? And before we get to there, I just want to say what I didn't say, but what many of you said is, here we are standing here together at this moment, facing the high holidays, facing Rosh Hashanah, which will be upon us in a moment, right? In a hot minute, as people say. And the power of those days. But what I want to ask now, and I want to ask now, because I think it's all connected, is what gets in the way of encountering Torah? What gets in the way of encountering a person? So one of the things, each of us has our own relationship with our parents, and we see some things, and there are some things we understand and some things we don't understand. And what I realize in this process of being with my mother at the end of her life, and being with her in her death, is that, wow, there's so many things I didn't see, so many things I didn't understand that other people saw and I just didn't get, right? And I'm getting it now, but it's a bit sad to me I didn't get it more in her lifetime. So this poem, which I'm going to ask Rabbi Sharon to read, is about what gets in the way, and this is not the only thing that gets in the way, many things get in the way of reading Torah. What gets in the way when we read Torah, and what gets in the way of, really encountering the gedula, the greatness of Torah, and also the greatness of one another? What gets in the way? So Sharon, if you can read this, that would be great.
Okay. I'll read it first in Hebrew and then in English. Yeah.
Great.
סיננתי מתוך מגילת אסתר את משקע השמחה הגסה, ומתוך ספר ירמיהו יללת הכאב במעיים, ומתוך שיר השירים את החיפוש האינסופי אחר אהבה, ומספר בראשית את החלומות ואת קין, ומתוך קהלת את הייאוש, ומתוך ספר איוב את איוב. והדבקתי לי מן השעריות ספר תנ"ך חדש. אני חי מצונזר ומודבק ומוגבל ובשלווה. אישה אחת שאלה אותי אמש ברחוב החשוך על שלום אישה אחרת, שמתה לא בעיתה ולא בעיתו של אף אחד. מתוך עייפות גדולה עניתי לה, שלומה טוב, שלומה טוב. From the book of Esther, I filtered the sediment. This is by Yehuda Amichai, I should have said first. From the book of Esther, I filtered the sediment of vulgar joy. And from the book of Jeremiah, the howl of pain in the guts. And from the Song of Songs, the endless search for love. And from the book of Genesis, the dreams and Cain. And from Ecclesiastes, the despair, and from the book of Job, Job. And with what was left, I pasted myself a new Bible. Now I live, censored and pasted and limited and in peace. A woman asked me last night on the dark street how another woman was who'd already died, before her time, and not in anyone else's time either. Out of a great weariness, I answered, she's fine, she's fine.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm sorry about the line breaks. As much as I try to sort of put in the appropriate line breaks, for some reason on Safari, they don't stay the way they're supposed to. So I urge you to look up the poem and read it and figure out what the right line breaks are. So, you know, I think there's all kinds of things that get in the way of really understanding Torah and hearing the power of its message. When I was at the Jewish Theological Seminary, there was a historical approach. And there was always like, yes, they said this because that was the cultural context, or the Torah says this because it's a polemic against this. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, what about the spiritual message? Like, is it all about cultural context and like the historical moment? Is it all about polemic and sort of, you know, the Talmud, like the rabbis are, you know, crafting counter messages to the Roman culture? I mean, it's or like, is there a human message here? So that's one of the things that gets in the way for me. You know, for other people that I study with, it's the patriarchy, the patriarchal nature of the text, or it's the cruelty, and it's there, right? This Torah has, it's kind of a mirror to who we are as human beings. And there's so much in it, and there is cruelty, and there is sexism, and there is, you know, just all kinds of things that are difficult to take in. And here Amichai, you know, it's a different approach. It's like, you know, I can't deal with this vulgar joy or the howl of pain or, you know, the endless search for love, like, or the despair or Job. You know, I need to censor it out. And what am I left with, right? I'm left with a new Torah, and now I live censored and pasted and limited and in peace. So what I'm left with is a limited life. Now, there's a lot to talk about, and this next stanza is very sort of cryptic and mysterious, and I don't think we really have time to unpack the poem. So I'm going to do one more thing with you before I open it up maybe to one or two more comments. I want to go right here, which recalls what Paul was saying about the difficulty of standing. And this is from David Grossman, who lost a son in the military. He says, in order to do almost anything, you have to act against the gravity of grief. It is heavy. It pulls you down. You have to make a deliberate effort to overcome it. You have to decide that you won't fall. In the last novel I wrote, Falling Out of Time, this idea of falling all the time, the temptation to fall, is very strong. I've always felt this temptation to fall and not stand up. And I think it's a constant pull for me in my life. I know these are two big points I'm making at the end here. So just to recap, and then again, I'll open it up briefly, very briefly, is what gets in the way of encountering the greatness of a person or of this sacred text that is our legacy? And then how do we stand, right? How do we just stand despite everything we face? And maybe despite the magnificence that we stand before, maybe that also is difficult. Okay, let me stop my share. I hope that was clear. I know there are a lot of big themes. Okay, so Kathy Lynn and Jessica, and I'm going to ask each of you to be brief because we literally have 2 minutes left. So as brief as possible, please. Kathy Lynn. And then Roberta, if we can. We'll see.
My comment was about the last part, and this just has so much for me to take in. But after my father died, it was the same. I always said, I got to know my dad after he died. I got to know him then. It's like the blinders of all the judgment I had and, you know, what I thought he should be and this and that. I started to have empathy and understanding much more.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you so much. Yeah, that wisdom comes to us, right? And sometimes it's in time and sometimes it's too late. Okay, so what are we going to do with time? So I see our dear Rabbi Ingvar is also here, and I'd love to hear what he has to say. Can we go a couple of minutes over? Is that possible? Is that all right? I don't know. Michaeli, tell me if we can. All right, I'm going to go to Rabbi Ingvar and then Jessica and Roberta. Go.
No, I want to go last. So if they can just, because.
Great. Okay, Jessica.
Oh, hi, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Jessica.
I just want to say one sentence. For me, the temptation to fall and sit down is fear-based, and the thing that makes me stand is love. So when you said to stand, I didn't want to stand, but I stand because I have love for you. And every time Rabbi David says, I stand for love, out of love. And then I want to fall down out of fear, which to me is the opposite of love.
Sorry, I don't know why I was muted. Thank you so much, Jessica. That was beautiful. Thank you. And thank you for standing. Okay, Roberta.
Yeah, just that temptation to fall is so deep. I think it's hitting all of us. And can we use that awareness of how strong that temptation to fall is in everyone to take on the commitment to hold each other up. When we're standing, let's hold each other up. I live in a place where people are not getting vaccinated. New York is not the world. And I'm like, let me hold people up. That's why, because they have this temptation to fall. So I'm taking this with me to heart deeply. Thank you.
Rabbi Ingvar.
Yeah. So what I wanted to say is I wanted to just say that unfortunately I missed most of the teaching. I very much wanted to be in it and to honor you, Rabbi Kolaresis, and to also honor your mother's life, to Chaya's life. And so I'd like to, but I heard the last piece and it's so beautiful. And so I wanted to invite all of us to stand with you at this moment as you recite the Kaddish de Rabbanan, both in memory of your mother and also in support, standing with you and recognizing how you help all of us, even as the gravity of grief pulls you down. You inspire all of us also to stand together and to stand up and to rise from that place and to resist the temptation to fall. So please, everybody, if you would, please rise if you are able, as our teacher, Rabbi Koresis, will recite the Kaddish Rabbanan.
Thank you so much. I don't know, I sort of hid my view, so I don't know if you can see me. And for me, and I think it's true, the Kaddish is all about standing in the face of death. So thank you, that was beautiful. And of course, I stand because of you, because of all of you. Yikadal v'yikadash merabah.
Amen.
V'alma divrach rute, v'yamlich malchute. V'chayechon v'yamechon, v'chayei d'chol b'Yisrael. Magala b'zman kariv v'emru, amen.
Amen.
Yishmei Rabba Nevarach L'Olam V'Yamei Amaya V'Barach V'Yishtabach V'Ba'ar V'Yitramam V'Yitmaseh V'Yitadar V'Yitavral V'Yitavral Shmeid V'Sha
Brichu.
Ve'ela Min Kol Berchata B'Shivata Shush Berchata V'Nechamata V'Amiram B'Yoma V'Emru, amen.
Amen.
Yisrael V'Al Rabbanan V'Al Tamidehom V'Al Kol Tamidehom V'Al Kol Manda Askim Ba'araita Di ba'atra hadem v'di b'chol atar ba'atar yehi lahon ulachon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayim arichin u'mizonei revichei u'porkana min kadam aruhan di b'shmaya v'emru,
Amen.
Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim tovim aleinu v'kol Yisrael v'emru, amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mamav u'barachamav yaseh shalom aleinu v'kol Yisrael v'kol yoshvei tevel v'emru, amen.
Amen. May your mother's memory be a blessing always.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.